Welcome, everyone. So glad to have you with us. I'm Barbara Slavin. I direct the Future of Iran initiative at the Atlantic Council. And we have a real treat for us today. I hope many of you in the audience have had a chance to watch the documentary Desert One on the failed US attempt to rescue American hostages held by Iran in 1980. If you haven't seen it, please do. The filmmaker, Barbara Kopple, who is with us today, has done an extraordinary job of portraying these events with some never before seen footage, including of President Jimmy Carter on the phone during the raid, and of an Iranian who, as a young boy, witnessed the series of calamities that culminated in the death of 8 American servicemen, and that deepened the sense of humiliation in the United States caused by the hostage crisis. We're going to talk about the movie itself, but also about where we are today. Why are the US and Iran still at loggerheads? What's the role of these incidents so long ago in continuing to fuel hostility and mistrust? What about other US and Iranian actions since then that have deepened the divide? And what will it take to get beyond this? So we have a wonderful virtual panel. We're going to start with remarks from Ambassador Stu Eisenstadt, who lived through this ordeal as Jimmy Carter's chief domestic policy advisor. He went on to serve in a number of positions that touched on Iran in the Clinton administration, including Undersecretary of State and Deputy Secretary of the Treasury. And we at the Atlantic Council have been fortunate to have his support and guidance in our work on Iran for some years. After Ambassador Eisenstadt, we will go to our panel, Barbara Kopple, the director of the film and a 2-time Academy Award winner for her previous work, Harlan County, USA, and American Dream. Colonel Ed Seifert, a decorated Marine pilot who led the command and control training in preparation for the rescue attempt. John Limbert, a veteran of the US Foreign Service, who was one of the 52 Americans held hostage in Iran. And last but definitely not least, Nasser Hadian, a professor of political science at the University of Tehran, who's also spent a lot of time in the US, both as a student and as a professor, and who understands these issues extremely well. If you'd like to join our conversation on social media, the hashtags on Twitter are ACIran and Desert One. Ambassador Eisenstadt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you for your leadership of our Iran initiative at the Atlantic Council, and congratulations to Barbara Kopple again for a terrific documentary, and particularly want to recognize Ed Seifert and Jim Limbert. The hostage crisis was absolutely fatal to the Carter presidency. It's the principal reason he was defeated by Ronald Reagan in 1980. Did Jimmy Carter lose Iran? No, the Shah did, but that does not mean that the administration and the president were blameless. To go back quickly, in 1953, the young Shah was reinstalled in his father's peacock throne by a coup against the popularly elected, democratically elected prime minister in Iran. And that coup was instituted by the CIA and MI6. And from that day through the Carter administration, the Shah was our principal ally in the region, had a virtually open shopping list of all of our most sophisticated arms. And yet, it was, in my opinion, the greatest intelligence failure in American history. The CIA did not appreciate the fact that the Shah's support rested on quicksand. The CIA was not permitted to do domestic intelligence, could not meet with opposition parties, was only allowed by the Shah to look at the Soviet Union. He relied on his own intelligence, Savak. There was a complete ignorance on the part of the US government of what Iran was really all about, notwithstanding the tens of billions of dollars of arms and other aid we poured into Iran. In many respects, the Shah was not, Barbara, a sort of typical autocrat. He was autocratic, but he was also a reformer. And one could make the argument that in empowering women and taking on the clerics, that he perhaps got ahead of a conservative society. Now, what mistakes did the Carter administration make in addition to the failure of the CIA, which was not his failure, but it's his administration? The first is, in December 31st of 1977, in Tehran at a New Year's Eve party, he applauded the Shah of having an island of stability in the midst of a region in chaos. A year later, he basically was gone. January 16th, 1979, he left. The question is, could we have done more to keep him there? Could we have empowered the military to, in effect, shoot the demonstrators and disperse them? The answer is probably yes, but that was been only temporary. The forces against him were so strong, and not just clerical, they were across the board, moderates, business people, and the like. Then the question was, once Khomeini came back, could he have been prevented from coming back? Should we have done more with the French where he was in exile? Again, I think it's possible. There were even efforts to shoot down his plane, but that would have been extremely difficult to do. Only 2 weeks after Khomeini came back on February 1st, 1979, and February 14th, there was an initial effort at storming the embassy, which people forget. Ambassador Sullivan was taken out blindfolded. We appealed immediately to the civilian leadership that Khomeini had appointed, his own Prime Minister Barzargan, his own Foreign Minister Yazdi. They went to the embassy, dispersed it, got the ambassador back, and we assumed that even with a clerical government, that we could do business with Iran. Then the fatal decision was made by President Carter in allowing the Shah to come back for medical treatment. That was a decision made in October, and it led directly to the storming of the embassy in November. Now, he was Carter, the last holdout in allowing the Shah to come back for cancer treatment. He even said at the climactic meeting, where even his vice president, Mondale, the Secretary of State, everybody else said, he's been our ally. It's only for humanitarian aid and for his medical treatment. And he said, what happens if they storm our embassy and take our hostages? What do we do now? So in a way, he foresaw what might happen. Nevertheless, he allowed it to happen. And before the Shah was allowed, we went to Barzargan and Yazdi, as we had done before in February, and said, look, please understand this is only for medical treatment. This is not to get him back into power. And they said, well, things have changed, but we'll do the best we can. That's all they could say. Now, when the actual hostage taking occurred on November 4th, 1979, exactly a year before the November 4th, 1980 election, the question was, what should Carter do then? I, as domestic advisor, and Dr. Brzezinski, as the national security advisor, suggested immediately military action, not bombing Tehran, but either mining or blockading the harbors of Karg Island, where about 60% of all of Iran's oil came from, and that was their principal revenue. That was turned down. The military wasn't happy about it because they said, well, the Russians may come in, it's the Cold War, use their minesweepers, and we'll have a direct confrontation with them. Others, his political people like Ham Jordan as chief of staff and top political aides say, well, get the hostages back, okay, but they'll come back in coffins. I don't believe that was the case. I think Khomeini's power at that point was still very contested, and if we had shown military force, that we might have gotten them back earlier. Again, that was a very difficult call. What then ensued, because he turned that down, were sanctions. We froze tens of billions of dollars of Iranian assets. We didn't allow any access to military supplies. We tried to get our allies to join in. And unlike what happened leading up to the JCPOA, Barbara, where the EU did help us, we got very, very little help from the Europeans and the Japanese in, for example, not buying Iranian oil. So we did not have the strongest efforts. We went to the UN, we got all the resolutions. But in the end, we were dealing with Khomeini, who did not want a deal. We actually reached several agreements to have the UN come and have the hostages like John transferred out of the control of the radicals to the government with the notion that they would then be negotiated back. Every agreement we had was vetoed by Khomeini. And here again was a lack of understanding of what was really happening in Iran. He was using them as pawns politically to strengthen his own position, which again was contested at that time. So there was no agreement we could have. Then, September 22nd, 1980, Iraq invades Iran. We were very close to an agreement at that point, and they thought we had encouraged Saddam Hussein to invade Iran. We did not provide the kind of military aid that Reagan covertly did. Perhaps if we had, it might have helped. But that really sealed the fate of the hostages at that point. Negotiating with one hand tied behind our back, only US sanctions, simply wasn't enough to put pressure on Khomeini, who again was using this for his domestic political interests. It's revealing that we actually reached an agreement after the election, but Khomeini, as one last act of spite against Carter, would only allow the hostages to be released 1 minute after Reagan was sworn in.
Thank you, Ambassador. That's a wonderful overview of the situation at the time for those who maybe are too young to have actually lived through them. I would add that the failure of the raid in April of 1980 compounded the sense of—
Yes, and if I just may add one matter to that, because Ed is here and he was the lead pilot. It was a very courageous decision by Carter to launch this rescue effort. It was very well planned, although I think there weren't enough practices. The helicopters were the Achilles heel because of rotor blade problems, because we didn't appreciate the sandstorms that would occur. But nevertheless, those who think that Carter was just weak, this was a very bold, very courageous action to call, coming from an aircraft, the Kitty Hawk, with more helicopters than the military thought were necessary. He added more as redundancies. And yet, through a series of hydraulic failures and sandstorms, an insufficient number were prepared to go from Desert One into Tehran. And this was again a tough call by Carter. The minimum required, Barbara, was 6 to go in, get the hostages, and come back. There were 5. A 6th might have gone in, but one of the pilots decided his hydraulic light was blinking. He didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
Carter could have said, let's roll the dice. He didn't. He said, okay, let's curb it. Let's go back. And then the second disaster occurred, which is because of a sandstorm that blew up. When one of the helicopters tried to escape, the rotor blade of that particular helicopter hit the C-130 loaded with the fuel that was going to be used to get the helicopters into Tehran. It burst into flames. 9 brave Americans were killed, and that compounded the disaster and again made it appear that Carter was simply feckless, when in fact, this was an incredibly courageous act. Jim Limber told me afterward he didn't even realize we were doing this. Of course, it was kept totally secret. Sure. We had a cook who had inside information. We knew exactly where Mr. Limbert and the others were being kept. And by the way, 6 people did get out through the Canadian embassy. Again, Carter did not want to pat himself on the back because he thought if he did, it would endanger the 52 who were left. But we did.
Ambassador, if I may stop you there, I want to get to our other speakers. We only have an hour, but thank you again for setting the scene. Let me go to Barbara Kopple now, and first, again, let me congratulate you on the film. But I have a real question about the Iranian footage, because you have several Iranians who were interviewed in the film. You have a man who as a young boy witnessed the terrible crash of the helicopter, and so on. So how did you get the Iranian footage? I know you weren't allowed to send in a team, and how were the subjects chosen to be interviewed?
Very interesting. We were actually vetted by the Revolutionary Guard, but we were not allowed in. So I guess they, did some research on us and decided, okay, we'll go forward with this. We found these 2 extraordinary women who were filmmakers, producers, and they were our team there. And they were given many of the interviews were already set up for them. But when you talk about the 11-year-old boy, that was one that wasn't set up. And they went to a village and they were asking people, have you, do you know anybody who knows anything about this? And they were directed to his home. And he was just absolutely amazing in the film because as he told his story, it was almost as if he was telling it through his 11-year-old perspective. And he said that he just wanted to get out alive because he wanted to go and tell all his friends at school about this exciting thing. Every year, his family would go on a bus trip. And so his entire family was in this bus. And he just wanted to live and have the excitement of recalling that they came through where all the military was.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a desolate place, but it appeared to have a lot of traffic for a dried riverbed.
Oh,
So
it
that suggests a lack of intelligence on the part of the military who picked this spot.
Yes, it was one small road. And even in the satellite audio, President Carter says, "Why did you pick this highway?" And the response was, well, that was really the only place we could land. And we didn't really know that it was going to be so busy.
Yeah. A couple of the people you interview who were part of the hostage holding milieu, it's been pointed out to me, and I know from my own reporting, that many of the hostage holders went on to regret to some extent what they'd done. The ones you got were fairly hardline and convinced that what they had done was still the right thing.
Yeah.
So I assume those people were chosen for you?
They were, yes, definitely. They were.
I figured.
All of them.
Yeah. Let me get to Colonel Seifert, who was part of this whole thing. Colonel, it was your decision to abort after a series of calamities. We mentioned the helicopter that crashed into the C-130. There was also a tanker truck full of fuel oil that exploded. Give us a sense of what your emotions were at the time and how you feel about it now. And I will note also Ambassador Eisenstadt talked about the courage. And I know that the kind of slogan that came up with afterwards was that you had the guts to try, having the guts to try. It certainly was an intrepid thing. So tell us a bit about how you feel about it, how you felt about it then, and how you look back on it now. And unmute yourself.
There you go.
Colonel? Yeah, there he is.
The key to magic buttons in the digital world, I guess. First of all, it's very nice to see everybody again. And Professor, nice to meet you. Looking forward to a good discussion. Just to kind of set the stage a little bit, I was brought in late in the scenario when the embassy was taken. I was on independent duty in Australia, of all places. And when the embassy was taken, I said, those poor souls are a long ways from nowhere. They're there for a long time. Not knowing that about a month and 5 days later, I'd be standing in front of somebody and giving me the job to put the helicopter force back together and execute a demonstration that would convince the military that it was still a viable way to go. The whole process, and I've talked about this at length with Ambassador Eisenstadt, is the fact that it was an integrally well-planned process. We did not, as a national asset, have a special operations force that could coordinate and oversee such an exercise. And we became highly compartmentalized. When I got engaged in the process, just to give you an example, I asked for some intelligence input, and I was basically told to watch Nightline. my communication efforts were minimal. As the group matured, there's no doubt in my mind that intuitively, just because of my experience as a commander and 53 guy for a decade at that time, that the number of helicopters chosen was directed, and I wasn't asked, or anybody else that I know of knowledge was asked for some real sincere important input. That's neither here nor there. When the president says go, you go. I got a quote from Ambassador Limbert that says, when the president says go to the military, we go. And when the president says go to the State Department, that begins the discussion. So I'll attribute that to him. But no, we were told to go. Relative to how I felt, we lost number 6 early in the game. We had 6 off the Nimitz. We continued on, and it was, to be quite frank with you, a gorgeous night. Best we could have hoped for. We still had 7 aircraft. I'm happy. The ability for me to communicate to the rest of the world was encapsulated in a very sophisticated radio at the time. And I think there were 5 or 6 of them in the world. And I had would always go through an independent operator. We were totally in radio silence other than that. As we saw this Taz or Haboob, which I was totally unfamiliar with, it basically looked like a fog bank rolling in up the Chesapeake around Norfolk, and I made the decision to continue on. It got worse. I decided to land, try to find out what the weather was at Desert 1. What I received was a forecast, not an actual report. Made a decision to continue. Number 5 lost his instruments. He turned around, went back to the Nimitz. We landed at on the next to the highway with 6 aircraft, me thinking we were ready to go. We had also, by the time I understood that my wingman had lost a hydraulic system. We had already loaded Delta on board, refueled, and were ready to go. I then had to address the issue with the folks in charge, and I made the decision not to recommend that we continue on with that aircraft because of weight, temperature, and you have 25 great Americans on there, that the probability of you surviving the whole thing was between slim and none, just due to the characteristics of the helicopter and where we were. So that was it. One aircraft decided he didn't have enough fuel to get back to the Nimitz. That initiated the sequence for the impact, because we had to move one aircraft to refuel the other. Unfortunately, due to technical issues and weight and everything else, the aircraft contacted the 130th wing. That accident or that incident has made me sick to my stomach for the last 40 years. The taking of the hostages in November has, and the treatment that they received has, I won't say embittered me, but it has certainly had a negative impact on how I feel about that area of the world and the Iranians. I don't think any of us hold any animosity towards the Iranians at all. It's not the point. The point is we were told to go and do something. We took a shot at it, and we found out a lot of bad things that have matured and produced a lot of what I would call, for the United States anyways, a lot of good things relative to the establishment of Special Operations Command and a really good capability to go and do something in a very similar circumstance. Range was a killer. I am often concerned that we don't, in fact, from a military perspective, and I felt it then, that we didn't really integrate well across the services. We certainly integrated very poorly, and this is 2020 hindsight, with the State Department and all the people that really knew what was going, had a much better feeling for what was going on in that country than any of our military geniuses. And I think you would find distinguished officers today like General Boykin and so forth that would support that. The idea that we were able to survive that and build a force and move on is a great thing. Subsequent operations have proved SOCOM does work. One of the things that I feel is very important is that we have a capability for the rest of the world to use. We need to be in a position and exercise a willingness to use that force, either as a show of force or as an actually active participant. I think there's a lot of opportunities out there that are missed. And I look back on that with disappointment, but we've come a long ways. And I think we've come a long ways in understanding some of the integration that we need to do with some very, very critical allies when things go on in the world. And we can't seem to garner that support because of either unilateral decisions or otherwise. And it's a question to me is how you really retain control of the dialogue. And I think at this particular time, the Iranians have it. Barbara, I just thank you very much for the opportunity.
You are quite welcome, and thank you for your comments. You mentioned the State Department. One of the things that's not in the film is that Secretary of State Cy Vance resigned because he so objected to even mounting the raid. He was afraid that what transpired actually would transpire, that it would be a failure and that harm would come to the hostages. Which brings me to John Limbert, the wonderful John Limbert, who, by the way, has just written a novel called Believers, Love and Death in Tehran, which I recommend. John, you didn't even know about the raid at the time. When did you know? And give us your reflections. I mean, here we are 40 years later. Some would say Iran is still taking hostages. We have dual nationals and others who are in jail in Iran. And the United States, after its early effort with sanctions, has gone whole hog with what it calls maximum pressure. How do we get out of this unfortunate spiral? What are the lessons you've learned over your long career? John Limbert. I hope we have not lost you. Have I shocked you into silence? If we've lost John, I may turn the question on its head and go next to Nasser and then back to John. Nasser, we were talking before this event. We noted that the Iranians who were chosen for the interviews were of a certain political faction and rather rah-rah. Do Iranians in general still remember the hostage crisis? What do they think about it? Or are they so absorbed now with getting through daily life that this is really just a historical footnote for them?
Okay, can you hear me, Barbara?
Yes, I can, loud and clear.
Of course, there are differences of views inside Iran now. If you ask the younger generation, I can say possibly a good portion of them cannot remember exactly what happened. And they have been told repeatedly by the radio, Iranian radio and TV, or the newspaper on the anniversary of what they call the capture of the spy net or the US embassy. Basically, I can say that this good portion, which is possibly half of them, are critical of what happened, and they think it was not justified morally and politically. So these are the younger generation. They cannot remember what happened. But the older generation, I can say that although at the time, majority of them supported the move, but now after 4 years, basically they have been, majority of them have been critical. And they think that was not morally a wrong move, a wrong action, a wrong decision. I'm sorry, it has been morally wrong decision. And also politically it has been wrong. It has had negative consequences for domestic political affairs and for our regional and international affairs. So they are, to a large extent, critical. Although there are people who still would support it from the older generation, and these are mostly, I can say, a portion of the conservatives and the radical forces in Iran who still would support the move. And some of the people, the newer generation, through reading basically and watching, they also would condone what happened. But to me, they are the minority, and most probably the minority of at most 20-25%.
Okay, appreciate that very much. I think that's a perspective we don't necessarily get in the film, and so maybe Barbara Kopple will have to add something. It's not too late. John, can you hear me now? Are you with us?
I wish, Barbara, can I add a few more words?
I'm back now. I'm back
Good.
now.
I don't know if you heard my question. Did you hear my question to you?
You asked about when we do about it and what was the reaction
Yeah, you could begin with that. Yeah.
when we do about the raid.
Yeah.
Okay, brief. The short answer is we didn't. We didn't know. We knew that.
Oh dear. Oh dear, John. You are fading in and out.
Barbara, can I add a few more words until
Yeah,
John?
sure, John.
Whatever efforts were being made on our behalf. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Nasser. You wanted to add something.
Yes, in fact, I would like to say that even among the top decision makers of the hostage taking, which we did not see any one of them in the documentary. Basically, the absolute majority of them are either my friend or they have been my former student. But of course, after taking the hostages, they became my student. So majority of them, I can say that they are critical and they are not happy about the consequences. Although still some of them justify what they did because they would say that, okay, we were scared. We thought, United States wants to stage a coup, so forth and so on. But still, some of them not only have regret what they have done, but they have apologized basically for their action. So I think the reason that we don't see them in the documentary may be basically that the authorities in Iran did not want to see those statements in the documentary. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we are in a period of confrontation again between the United States and Iran, and a time when Iran is trying to look tough. But I remember doing interviews with some of the former hostage holders 20 years ago, where they said that they initially intended it to be a very short sit-in, and then it was seized upon as a way to marginalize the so-called Islamic left among the revolutionary forces and to consolidate the religious right and their power in the government. So complicated politics, which, as Colonel Seifert pointed out, not that many people in this country understood at the time. I'm not sure if John is back. If you can hear me, John, if your connection is poor, you might actually type some remarks, which I can then read for you. I will tell the audience that we were chatting via email before this, and I asked you what it was going to take for the United States and Iran to finally reconcile. And you had a wonderful Persian proverb about the need for both countries to put their posteriors in a bucket of cold water. And I'm not sure what the Persian is for it, but I thought it was a very interesting suggestion. I want to start taking some questions from the audience now. I hope that John will be able to get himself back in the conversation, because we definitely want his voice. One of the great things in this film is a little clip of John, who of course spoke fluent Farsi, having been a Peace Corps volunteer in Iran, speaking with a then, I guess, senior but not supreme leader, Cleric Ali Khamenei, who came to talk to the hostages about their conditions. And so it's a wonderful discussion where John uses the principle of Persian hospitality against the hostage holders. Let's look at some of the questions that we're getting in.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, sure, please.
Oh, okay. We did ask the moderates if they would speak on camera, and they said no. And also too, we had the scene of all edited with Cyrus Vance.
Yeah.
So that could be one of the DVD extras, but the film was starting to go into the weeds too much. So I just wanted, you all to know that these were things that were important to us. And if you had seen one of our cuts, it was, like 4 hours and then 3 hours and bringing it back down. So I just wanted to let you know that.
All right, I appreciate that. Going to some of the questions, and Ambassador Eisenstadt, if you're still with us, I wonder if you could weigh in on the so-called October surprise conspiracy theory, and the conspiracy. I assume this is referring to efforts by the Reagan administration to prevent the hostages from being freed before the election. Are you still there? And if so, do you have
I
any
am very
thoughts on
much
that?
here. I hope you can see and hear me. Yes, so the Reagan people were trying to build up a defense against a possible last-minute agreement that would, of course, boosted Carter. So they talked about an October surprise. And let me respond in two ways. The first is absolutely factual, because I was there. And that is that the weekend before the election, we were even and in fact surging against Reagan. On the Sunday before the Tuesday in Chicago, I was awakened with Carter to come back to Washington at 3 a.m. because there was a new offer by the Iranians. I told Carter not to come. They were just playing games that would bring the whole issue back. He insisted on going back. It wasn't sufficient, and that blew up. Now, the October surprise turned out to be, in fact, the other way around, because there is at least circumstantial evidence that the campaign manager for the Reagan campaign went to Mexico and perhaps to Paris, and presumably met with Iranians. There's been a new book that's come out on this as well. There were congressional hearings held that determined insufficient evidence, but Gary Sick, the NSC advisor, has written a book about it, and a new book has come out with more detail. And they basically said to the Iranians, don't release the hostages now. You'll get a better deal from us. And in fact, there was the Iran-Contra affair where they did get US arms. We did not give it to them. I want to stress that this has not been conclusively proven, but there is certainly a lot of circumstantial evidence. It's strange that the campaign manager would have disappeared from the U.S. only weeks before. There is also some indication of whether George H.W. Bush, who became the vice president, and Jim Baker has made it very clear that he was not involved. But I think that he said the campaign manager, who later became the CIA director under Reagan, could be, and he said so in the paperback edition of my book, he wouldn't put anything past him, because in fact he engineered the stealing of our briefing book for the critical debate between Reagan and Carter, and that's admitted. Jim Baker admitted it. He stole he got access to it and stole our briefing book. They know all the attack plans we were making. So Jim Baker basically said, I wouldn't put anything past him.
Thank you for clarifying that. I understand we have John Limbert on the phone, so let's try him that way. John?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, bravo. Okay, so, no, we can see you, can't hear you.
Okay, what about now?
Yes, we can. Okay, so John?
Yeah.
Well,
He had a cell phone on or something.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to be a spectator on this one, I think.
I guess so. It was a good faith effort. Anyway, I told your anecdote about both sides putting their posteriors in buckets of cold water. So I think that is still an excellent suggestion. Let me go back to some more of our questions, which are piling up. Okay, this is from Ed Martin. He says he remembers when he first heard on the news about the incident, he was concerned that the helicopters had made it to Tehran and there would have been many people, including hostages, killed. Does anyone think that is a potential, that if the helicopters had actually gotten to Tehran, the outcome would have been even worse, more than 8 Americans killed? I'm not sure who wants to grab that one up.
Well, I think Ed Seifert should respond. I have my own thoughts, but let's give Ed a chance if he's still with us.
I will, and let me add one other. This is from Sina Azodia, who is a resident fellow with us. He asks if the failure of the mission was ultimately the result of the notion that no military operation ever goes according to plan. I'm not sure if that's the case, but yeah, was there any thought given to the fact that it could have gotten even dicier if the helicopters had made it to Tehran?
So again, I don't want to take Ed's place. Is Ed still with us?
Ed, are you still on? Have we lost Ed as well? In which case, Stu, I think we'll go to you.
Ed's there, but he has to unmute. Okay.
It's technology. I'm analog, all right? I think you in retrospect, you have to take a look at the gross situation. We already had one helicopter in a dry lake bed coming across the beach. I didn't know what had happened to number 5 until basically I got back into Egypt. It wasn't a concern of mine because I had 6. The idea, and I would take comments really from somebody like Wade Ishimoto, you had an intelligence breakdown already. You had an oil truck at one end of the zone, and we had 44 Iranians in a nice new Mercedes-Benz bus. In our assumption, we would have gone on. There's no doubt about that. But the potential of raising the national interest within Iran, I think, the idea that we were so dependent upon surprise that I think there is an element of truth there relative to risk. Now, when you're told to go in the situation that we were in, those elements don't really come into play. The idea that you're told to go, you go. And it would be the idea also that no military operation goes as originally planned. There's some credence to that, but good planning and analysis. We didn't, sophisticated planning and sophisticated analysis, we did not take advantage of at the time to really make a coherent decision on the number of aircraft. So the risk all the while was increasing the farther we went along, because you had more trash behind us, between 2 helicopters, a bus with 44 people on board, a hijacked truck. Now it's pretty hard on a road that was supposedly unoccupied. Yeah, I think the risk reward there was probably correct. Probably other people would have gotten hurt in the process. It would not have been pretty.
So
I have advice from John Limbert here for John Limbert. If you mute your computer audio but use the phone, you can speak and be seen without audio feedback. So that's just a suggestion if you want to make one last stab at it. I think we should also point out, of course, the United States did not have a massive military presence in the region in 1980 the way that it does now. This was staged out of Egypt and out of Oman.
So Barbara, there was a very sophisticated plan. We had buses at Desert 2 outside of Tehran, well hidden, in which hundreds of special forces would have been able to storm the embassy. We knew that the guards, after so many months, were lax. We think we could have gotten the hostages out. We knew where they were exactly from a cook who had given information to the CIA. And then there was a stadium where they would be taken by the helicopter and then back to Desert 1. So it would have been difficult. There were a lot of moving parts, but not impossible at all. Not impossible.
Okay. I have a question for Barbara Kopple. This is to explain the thought process that went into including such harsh graphics and burned bodies in the film.
I'm sorry, there's other audio, so I couldn't hear the end of your question.
The question was why you had such harsh graphics, including burned bodies in the film.
Well, the burned bodies were not a graphic. That was real. And I felt very strongly that this is war, and this is something that we really needed to show, that when the special forces, did something like this, that there were times when it wouldn't be successful and people would lose their lives. And I really wanted an audience to know. The graphics were illustration and animation. They were done by an Iranian animator, and he now lives in the States, but he really understood, the area and knew about all of this. And this all came from the stories of the people that we interviewed. And we really wanted people to understand this was a secret mission. There wasn't even a photograph. There wasn't anything. And the only way to really show what happened was through animation. And many of the people who have seen it have said to us that this is very, very close to what really happened.
There's a couple questions from Christine Rostam, where she notes that there's some graffiti on the embassy wall that suggests that a number of the hostage holders were not eager to continue this hostage crisis, and that this shows that there were mixed feelings about the hostage crisis on the part of those who were taking part. I don't know if John is in a position to say anything on the phone. John, are you completely out of it now, or
Are you, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Okay, let's forget the picture. Just
Okay.
If you can.
No, that's a good question. It was pretty clear from sort of the undertones we could overhear from the students, who were very careful about what they said in front of us. That there was a lot of disagreement and dissatisfaction. I mean, the undertone was, we didn't sign up to be prison guards or hotel keepers. We signed up to make a political statement and leave, and they realized that they were being used. Nasser pointed that out, as did Master Eisenstadt. They realized they were being used, and they were caught, and a number of them actually left early for that very reason.
I have here a conspiracy theory from, I believe, an Iranian attendee who claims that Brzezinski, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the national security advisor, organized a series of events that began with the occupation of the US embassy in Tehran. So there are, sort of like the 9/11 conspiracy, somehow we did it to ourselves. I think all of us who were around during that period can vouch for the fact that no, the United States did not organize the taking of its own embassy. Nasser, I want to come back to you, if I may, since we so rarely get a voice out of Iran. What do you think it's going to take to put this behind us and to get back on some sort of constructive path? The diplomatic equivalent of putting both our posteriors in a bucket of cold water, as John has recommended.
I'm glad you asked the question, Barbara. That because I wish to say that right now we are also again very close to U.S. election, like then, and the lessons learned can be very helpful for us, or the lessons which can be learned can be very helpful for us now. To me, it is important those forces who are for rapprochement and a better relationship should do their best now. It's a time to be motivated, to work hard. To be frank with you, I'm very much worried. A misunderstanding, a misperception, a miscalculation can lead to a major regional war. We were very close to it a few months ago, very close, just inch away from a major war. So we should not let that happen. And there are people, although minority, but there are people in both countries who would not be unhappy about waging a war to challenge one another. So that's why, and they think they can get over it quickly. They have their own calculus, strategic calculus, and in Iran there are people who would calculate, okay, that would not be all that bad. I'm sure that would be the case in the US too. So, but the point is, we should be proactive in next few weeks, next few months, in order to stop any potential for war. So that's one group that we have to contain them both in Washington and in Tehran. Then we have to move forward, and I'm really hopeful. Of course, I'm going to have a talk tomorrow with IISS with the scenario if the Biden administration, and 2 weeks later, hopefully about the Trump administration, if they are in power, then what are the scenarios? What can be done? So I would lay out exactly what is going to happen and what can be done, basically, for a rapprochement. To be frank with you, I think already there are some infrastructure established between the Trump administration and Iran, and I will not be surprised to see that right after the election, something is going to happen. But certainly, the possibility of that happening with the Biden administration would be more, because almost everyone knows everyone from the other side. The people who are going to be in a position of power basically know the counterpart in Iran, and that is a great help. They can communicate easily with one another, and they can lay the infrastructure for a rapprochement, not just only limited to nuclear issue, which certainly at the beginning, it should be limited to the nuclear issue. Otherwise, we are not going to go anywhere. But a few months later, a year later, we can begin to discuss other issues as well. There is a good possibility there. So that's why I'm hopeful, and we should work very hard within the next few months to prevent any accident. Any accident can easily to escalation, and that's what I'm really worried about.
Maybe Ambassador Eisenstadt, I'll give the last word to you as somebody who has followed this issue so closely for 40 years.
I would like to say something very briefly also.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Even though we're not getting John Limber to be able to talk, I think one of the great things that he did is right after he was released, the press came up to him and asked him about, how he felt about Iran. And what he said is, they are beautiful people. They are cultured. They have great art. He married an Iranian woman. And today his children have never been able to go back to Iran to see their roots. So I wanted to sort of say my last piece on that very positive note that means so much to me.
I appreciate that very much. Ambassador Eisenstadt, do you have any final thoughts on how we can finally put all of this behind us?
I do. I don't think it can occur with one giant leap. Tom Pickering and I, career ambassador, and I wrote a recent op-ed article, and we suggested a number of small trust-building steps. For example, that the U.S. would not veto the IMF's emergency assistance for COVID aid to Iran. And there would be a series of reciprocal steps. Iran, for example, would pull back from exceeding its limits under the JCPOA. And that there would be a number of those kinds of measures so that we could get back to the negotiating table. It's quite clear that we're not going to be able to live with the JCPOA exactly as it was. But I do think that it's important to get them back. I think that we undercut our allies by unilaterally moving away, and that if we can get our allies together with positive steps that can be taken on both sides for an improved JCPOA, that it's possible. Again, it's not going to be one leap forward, but it will be a series of trust and confidence building measures, moving away from this maximum pressure effort by the current administration, which really is, in a sense, after regime change. So that is our feeling. I'm not speaking for the Biden administration, but really the point that Tom Pickering and I made, step by step, early confidence building measures, getting back to the negotiating table on the JCPOA, and then having mutual trade-offs on sanctions relief for coming back into a stronger JCPOA, and then moving on to the missile issue, support for terrorism, human rights, and so forth.
Well, we've come to the end of the hour. I'll apologize for some of our technical difficulties, but as we know, this is what happens these days in these virtual events. For those who haven't seen the film, please, there's so much there. And so thank you again so much to all of those who participated, and come back again. Be safe too.